Hi everyone. Welcome to GemMaker's Industry Engagement webinar for industry engagement during COVID. We'd like to thank you for joining us today. And this webinar has been developed as a professional development and support for researchers and HDR students. Before we start, we'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're all located today. We pay our respect to elders past, present and emerging. I'd like to specifically acknowledge the Gadigal, who are the traditional owners on the land on which I stand today. We're from GemMaker. We're a commercialisation agency and we work with research organisations, startups and innovative businesses to help bring research and new products to market. We've developed this free webinar when we saw what COVID was doing to the university and to industry. We want to support researchers and HDR students with finding some positives amongst all this chaos, and to try and support you with some tools and tricks in your industry engagement endeavours that you're going to be doing during COVID, but also post-COVID. In this webinar, we're going to be covering the impacts on the pandemic on the R&D and industry within Australia. We're going to discuss how you can expand and leverage your networks from a safe distance, how you can adapt your value proposition in this altered world, and hopefully you'll go away with some smart strategies and case studies of what we're doing and what other organisations, innovative organisations are doing during COVID. So our attendees today range from HDR students just on the start of their research journey, but we've also got a number of senior researchers. You're all from a variety of organisations, both universities and research institutes. Your backgrounds are incredibly diverse, from arts and social sciences, business and law, and also STEM. So just to introduce myself, my name's Dr. Julie Wee. I have a background in research. I spent 15 years in medical research. I did my PhD in immunology at the Garvan Institute in Sydney, and I did a postdoc in malaria research at Sydney University. I've been at GemMaker now for 6 years, and I do a lot of work supporting researchers to engage with industry and helping them on that journey. Over to you, Nat.
Hi, my name's Natalie Chapman. I'm the Managing Director of GemMaker. I started as a chemist and then moved into marketing, and I worked at Ansto for 10 years before starting GemMaker 8 years ago. So I've got about 18 years experience helping researchers commercialise their technology and growing technical-based businesses.
Thanks, Nat. Just a bit of housekeeping before we start. For those of you that might not have used Zoom webinars before, there's a Q&A box that should be at the bottom of your screen. We encourage you, if you've got some questions, to type them in throughout the session. We've got our awesome ops manager, Jessica Simpson, also joining us today, and she'll be helping triage those questions. We'll try our very hardest to get to those questions throughout the session. And if we can't, we'll get back to you after the session. So this is our very first webinar that we've ever done as GemMaker, so please be kind and gentle with us as we're learning to do things differently in COVID, as is everyone else. The other thing today is that we're going to be running a few polls to get your feedback and input along the way. So the polls are anonymous, so don't worry about putting in your feedback along the way. It's all going to be anonymous. So we're going to start now with our first poll. And I'm going to leave it up for about 30 seconds. Have you previously engaged with industry? If you could provide your feedback, just so we can get a bit of an idea of who we've got virtually in the room. And all the results are coming in. Great, thanks everyone for sharing. I'm going to share the results now. So we can see that there's a bit of a mix of experience within the room, but I guess that most of you have engaged with industry a little bit. Some of you haven't engaged at all, and some of you have through your supervisor. So fantastic. So this session that we're preparing today is not a introductory industry engagement. It's an industry engagement session with the lens of COVID in mind. So it's how are we doing industry engagement and how would we suggest you approach industry engagement in the new COVID era? Fantastic. So as you're all aware, COVID has impacted the world enormously, and it's impacted all sectors. Universities Australia are forecasting that the loss to university R&D is estimated to be $2.5 billion in 2020. And that's going to place at risk at least 38% of research salaries. This drop is likely to be worse for research intensive universities, with EMCRs and recent graduates most likely to be most disproportionately affected due to the highly casualised and fixed term nature of the university research workforce. Research institutes, and those of you that are here from research institutes will be aware that you rely a lot on donations and philanthropy to help support and prop up the grant income that you receive. This is now going to face uncertainty with the change in the economy. It's too early now to say how COVID is going to affect research grants from the government. However, it's important to note that Australian spending on research has flatlined over the last few years. Government departments are also going to be affected as funding and programs are going to need to be reassessed to make up for the shortfall for COVID support schemes. At this stage, the government is heavily focused on restarting the economy with jobs safely. And most of you are probably aware that the next federal budget has been pushed back to October at this stage. Many industries are facing job losses. Some businesses are shutting. Some have a hiring freeze or standing down staff. Some staff are on forced leave and some are taking 70% of their pay to sustain a job. Many sectors have been negatively impacted, such as tourism, retail, food and beverage, gyms, allied health. And some of these immediate effects that we're seeing are going to have some long-term ripple effects in other sectors such as construction, manufacturing, logistics, agriculture, and the housing industry. The way in which we work is also looking like it's going to change dramatically. However, there are businesses that are going to have a strong financial base coming out of this COVID pandemic. And there's some that are particularly experiencing great deals of growth, and these include online entertainment, Zoom and other video conferencing, home office furniture, laptops, IT, internet service providers, couriers, gym gear providers, those in manufacturing, particularly the ones that are producing PPE, sanitizer, ventilators, those that can 3D print for manufacturing, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. Even things like takeaway containers and plastics manufacturing has increased. So while we're aware that the research community is hurting, we just want you to be aware that industry is also hurting. There's going to be pressure from universities to find alternate sources of funding. We just want you to be mindful of the fact that industry don't have deep pockets, and the way that they're going to be looking at partnering with research organisations is looking for new and clever ways to help them innovate. They're going to be looking for ways to reduce costs of operations, perhaps ways to increase safety of their staff and their customers, and also ways to be more efficient. Industry's unfortunately not a cash cow, and we just want you to keep that in mind as we progress through today's webinar.
So COVID has fundamentally changed the way we work, the way that we play, the way that we eat, how we're educated. And while restrictions are being slowly lifted, things are really never going to be the same. So the interesting thing out of all of this is things that were deemed impossible or too bureaucratic and wouldn't happen anytime soon have happened almost overnight. So much of our nation started working from home within a matter of weeks. Telehealth, which we've seen try to be done over the last 10 years, managed to be done with what seemed a week with Medicare billing. Banking, traditionally conservative industry, is now allowing checks to be processed online. Contactless payments are the new norm. Cash is completely out. even that they're changing how much we can tap without using a PIN, just so that we don't actually touch a device. All of our universities and our schools have done online education very quickly. Retired health professionals are coming out of retirement to help support the health system, and learning about upskilling for nursing and other health professionals is now happening en masse, and retraining of staff from airlines into shopping centres, into schools, childcare, and a variety of other areas is now happening. The Olympics, sports, the arts, live theatre, everything that we're used to going out and doing and enjoying stopped. Zoos are now changing, and live streaming animals. Our outdoor entertainment has now become indoor entertainment as our arts institutions find new ways to engage with us. Human behaviour post-COVID will change, and it'll change how we shop, how we work, how we travel, how we educate, and how we spend our time with each other. So why should you engage with industry? I guess, first of all, universities were quite hard hit by COVID, with the international students not being allowed into the country, and now pretty much anyone being allowed into the country. So the student income has decreased, and then the closing of the campuses has meant online education is becoming the new norm. And so universities need to bring in new forms of income. So when we talk about engaging with industry, first of all, we should probably start by defining what we're saying when we're talking about industry. And we're not just talking about multinationals. So we're talking about government, we're talking about not-for-profits, startups, SMEs, other education institutions. Industry is basically anyone that you're going to be working with. Anyone that end users, contract research customers, anyone that you're helping to solve a problem for. And with the less government funding and less student income, there'll be more pressure than ever to increase funding through industry engagement. So universities and researchers that have always had strong relationships and a history of delivery are going to be able to engage with industry most easiest. In terms of why else should I engage with industry? I guess it helps you better frame your research. It helps the research that you have get greater impact because it's getting out into use, and it will also provide alternate career opportunities down the track for you. So research impact, funding, solving real problems, job opportunities, these are all a win-win. And basically it's a really good time to start if your university has been more research intensive, to start moving down that pathway and start working out how you can be helping industry. So why would industry want to engage with you at the moment? At the moment, they're hurting. They don't have a lot of money. They're looking at what they should be doing next and how they're going to survive. And it's in that, how are they going to survive and what's next and what are the problems and where are the markets, that is the potential for you to engage with industry. So industry have problems, and if you can actually solve them with your skills, your experience, your capabilities, your facilities, then that is an opportunity for you to engage with industry. And they will quite happily pay you and find the money to pay you to solve a problem for them, which will either open up new markets, bring them new products, decrease their risk, improve their safety, and increase their efficiency. So basically what you're after is a win-win for both parties. You're both getting something out of it. It's not one is getting more than the other. So networking during COVID. Networking and COVID together seem a bit like an oxymoron, really. For our business, we actually rely on being able to network. That's how people find out about us. We go to an event, we have meetings, we meet people face to face, and they can talk to us, see the whites of my eyes, as one potential customer had said to me once before. They want to know that we're genuine, we have experience, and they like to do business with people that they like and trust. And so all of a sudden we have COVID hit, and an event that I was supposed to attend in the US, where I was going to meet lots and lots of people from tech transfer offices all over the world, as well as lots of business people in the US. And all of a sudden that conference just didn't happen. And we're like, oh, okay, so, half of what we do in terms of networking and marketing was going to happen at that particular conference. And so we've had to rethink about how we connect with our audiences, and building up your networks and meeting new clients. And so what we've been doing is a bit of homework, really. We've been looking through who's been successful in winning grants, whether they're accelerating commercialisation grants or other large industry-related grants, and looking at the potential clients, seeing where we have the best fit of our experience and what we've worked on and who they are and what they're doing. And we've been sending targeted LinkedIn messages to the particular people running those organisations, and we've been getting some very good feedback and some good then video conference calls to have with them as the next follow-up stage. And so, us using Zoom has been fantastic with our current clients, and deepening the relationship with our current clients as well as new clients. We've also been keeping visible on social media on both Twitter and LinkedIn. We've been preparing articles on grant writing in the commercial space and other articles. And we've also had a newsletter go out. It's called, I forgot what it's
Rays of Sunshine.
Rays of Sunshine. So what we found was that when COVID started, every morning when you woke up, it was just more bad news. And frankly, after doing this day after day after day, we just thought, we can't do this any longer. We have to share and find the funny stories that are happening, and the good news and the fantastic resources that are out there. And we wanted to share that with our network. It was not a marketing exercise in terms of sales and business. It was connecting warmly with our network and providing them with some good news and happiness as well. And that's just part of just building the relationships that you have with people. And we've had really good feedback out of that as well. So we also we stay on top of the news as well. So there's lots of news going on in lots of areas. Believe it or not, there is news outside of COVID, which is fantastic as well. But keeping an eye on what's going on in Australia, internationally, and also in the various sectors that we work has been very important for us, identifying opportunities that are out there and seeing where industry needs us and needs some of our clients has been quite crucial in then developing our networks and who we should be speaking with.
Thanks, Nat. So some of you may be aware that there's quite a lot going on at the moment, despite us all being in isolation and lockdown. And I think this is going to be continuing. I'm hoping this is going to be continuing for some time to come as restrictions start to ease. It's still going to be a while until we start seeing big events. So this is just a very sort of short list that we came up with quite quickly on some of the networks and groups that we've seen at the moment that are running active online events. We really encourage you to think about what sort of networks you want to get involved with, your potential partners, potential industry partners, what networks do they belong to? Because this is a great way for you to interact with them. So for example, yesterday I went to an IMNIS. I'm not quite sure whether many of you would have heard of IMNIS. It's an industry mentorship program in the STEM sector. For those of you that are PhD students, I encourage you to take part in this, because you can actually be paired with an industry mentor, and it's a really great program. They ran an event yesterday online that I took part in, and I actually used that to network afterwards, and I contacted two of the speakers afterwards. So for those of you that are an introvert, it's also a dream, because being able to network via email is often much more comfortable for some people. So I encourage you to look up events, see what's going on in your sector or in your space. Their growth centres are running quite a lot of online events. It's amazing how active the incubators are being at the moment. They're running some fantastic events that actually normally you probably would not be able to get access to, because they're either in another state, they're ticketed, they're only open to entrepreneurs or residents at that particular incubator. Cicada have been running some fantastic events. So I encourage you to have a look. We'll send out an email after this webinar with a list. It's certainly not comprehensive, but just to give you some pointers on where to start looking for events. So I'm going to do a quick poll again. Who's been taking part in webinars or professional development during COVID? So I'm just going to leave this up for about 30 seconds. Fantastic. Great. So we can see from these results that most of you are, which is brilliant. I really encourage you to look a little bit outside your usual networks. Try something new. It's a great opportunity to do it. Doing it online means that you can actually leave. And it's good to see that nobody's yet left this webinar, but you can quite easily leave without causing too much offense. You can save time. I mean, normally when we go to an event, we have to travel, you spend the time at the event and then the networking afterwards. It actually can be quite a time consuming process. So this can be quite an efficient way to network. So another tool that we use to network pre-COVID, and now we're using it even more so during COVID, is LinkedIn. LinkedIn's a fantastic tool for networking, but it can be a tool used for lots of other things. It's a great way for you to be able to identify a particular person within an organization that you'd like to contact. Rather than going through the websites of each of the organizations and looking up who are in those roles, LinkedIn has all of that information in one spot. So if you're looking to partner with a company or an organization, you could search for either their Chief Innovation Officer, their Head of R&D, Product Development Officer, Quality Control, Safety Officer, depending on what solution it is that you're trying to provide them. LinkedIn's a really great way to connect with both industry and government professionals. It's also another way that you can also let your community know that you're looking for opportunities. It's what we use to keep abreast of the latest news in industry and research. And we actually also, it's a really good way for you to make that first impression. Whenever we go and meet with someone or virtually meet with someone, we always look at their LinkedIn profile. So keep in mind that this is going to be your first impression to the outside world. It's also LinkedIn, your headline and your summary in LinkedIn ranks very highly in a Google search. So I encourage you to spend some time writing a good headline and a good summary. So how do you make contact with someone via LinkedIn? First of all, identify the organization in which they belong and the appropriate contact person. And like I said previously, you look for that particular key role, be it the Head of R&D, Chief Innovation Officer, Chief Safety Officer. If they're a second or third degree connection, you can send them an email, which is like a private message. I really encourage you, if you are jointly connected to someone else on LinkedIn, to try and see if you can get a warm introduction. It always helps. If you want to try and cold call someone through LinkedIn, it usually requires a paid account. Natalie and I both have paid LinkedIn's account. We've decided that it's worth the investment because it allows us to contact people, and we do a lot of market research, and having cold call is quite required when you're trying to do market research outside your sector. We'd encourage you, if you're perhaps going to be doing some cold calling, you can just pay for it for a month and use that and have one person in your group to do the contacting via LinkedIn. Failing a paid LinkedIn account, this is where your network is key. So having a well-developed network can help you contact people via LinkedIn. So I'm going to do another quick poll. And then I can see we've got a question coming in. How often do you use LinkedIn? Interesting. Got a real mixed bag. So 40% of you don't actively use LinkedIn. 23% of you use it daily. Natalie, how often do you use LinkedIn?
I check it first thing in the morning. I'll check it a few times in the day. I'll check it at night while I'm waiting for dinner, if I'm lucky and my husband's cooking. I'll read it before I go to bed. So yeah, I use LinkedIn really frequently so I can get up to speed on what the latest news is, and also, yeah, see who else I need to be connected with. But it's mainly reading news and knowing what's going on in the industry is very, very important, and its latest news comes out of LinkedIn.
I don't use it as frequently as you, Nat, but I do use it to keep up to date with news, and also keeping up to date with where people are moving, you know, job changes and things like that. It's always great to know where people move to, and that's a great way for expanding your networks. When you have a contact and they move to a different organisation, that then expands your network even further. We have a question coming in. What are the best resources to learn how to leverage your LinkedIn profile? So I'm going to say Google. There are some really great Google sites, and I can look them up and send them out with the email that give you some great tips on how to update your LinkedIn profile. I assume the term is leveraging your LinkedIn profile. I mean, number one would be making sure that it's up to date. Number two would be making sure that you have connected to those that you collaborate with, that you work with, that you've worked with in the past, so that you're building your network. Posting content would also be useful. Posting relevant content. Commenting if someone shares an article that's interesting, commenting and saying, great article, I enjoyed this aspect to it. Being active on LinkedIn is also really useful.
Yep. I find sharing articles is extremely important, but also if you're an expert in your field and you're writing articles that you can put on LinkedIn, and then others, it's not just a small network that'll find you, it's people in industry, people internationally, if you've got good content and you've also hashtagged it with the various subject material as well.
But we'll see if we can find some good LinkedIn resources, because there are some out there that tell you, because it's also something you need to be conscious of. You're incredibly busy. You have got a lot of pressures in research and teaching students, etc., that you don't want to be spending too much time. You want to be effective in your use of LinkedIn. So we'll see if we can find some great resources to send out afterwards to help you make the most of the time that you have. Fantastic.
There's another question that's just come in too.
Oh, yeah, would love to get some directional links. Okay, great. We'll look that up, and we'll send a follow-up email after this webinar, probably early next week, and we'll put those links that we find in there. Great. Thank you for that great question. Over to you, Nat.
Sorry, we've also got on the chat recommendations. Right, okay, sorry. Don't mind me. Right, so you need to differentiate yourself. Obviously, I'm a Star Wars fan, so that's why you're getting this as an image. But basically, there's lots of people in similar boats to you, lots of experts in, you know, your space, whether they're consultants externally or they're other academics, they may be nationally or internationally. And so you really have to stand out. And so if you want to differentiate yourself, you have to show why you add the value. So this is termed what's your value proposition, if you want to use the management speak. And your personal value proposition is, how do you add value? What are you doing that sets you apart from everybody else? And why would an industry partner want to actually work with you and not a researcher from the same field or in another institution. And so when you're thinking about it, think about what IP do you have, what expertise do you have, what understanding of particular sectors, and how your skills can be used to solve problems, so that you stand out from the other academics, the consultants, and the other solution providers.
So I'm just going to add, we've had a great comment too also from Sandy that we should get regarding LinkedIn, is that it's also great to get people that you've worked with to give recommendations on LinkedIn. And that's really great for building personal brand and credibility. Thanks, Sandy. That's a really fantastic point. So you can actually request people write recommendations for you. I have done that for others, particularly if you've worked with someone and it's gone really well and you've completed a piece of work. You can certainly ask for a recommendation, and that looks really fantastic on your LinkedIn profile. Back to value proposition. So Nat asked me to prepare my value proposition for this webinar, and I actually had to think about it. And in thinking about it, I actually think that I probably have two. So when I am talking to universities, I like to talk up my research background because that gives me credibility. But when I'm talking to people not from universities, so from innovative businesses and startups and SMEs, they're less interested in how many years of research experience I have. They're more interested in what capabilities I can bring to the table. So I actually change my value proposition depending on the audience. So my value proposition when I talk to universities is probably very similar to what I said at the start, where I have a 15-year, had a 15-year career in medical research. I was successful and got over $1 million in grant funding in that time. I represented my data nationally and internationally. I supervised students. And so I talk about that to universities. And now I say that now that I'm at GemMaker, I support researchers in engaging with industry. Then when I go and talk to startups and SMEs, they're less interested about the finer details about my research career. So I would say to them, I have a background in research, but I now work with GemMaker, and in my role at GemMaker, I help develop business plans for innovative businesses. I conduct market research and recently conducted international market research for a national research facility. They're more interested in the projects that I work on and the kind of skills that I have. So that's how I change my value proposition. So Nat, what's GemMaker's value proposition? And has it changed during COVID?
Right. So GemMaker's value proposition for universities is that we have decades of experience working with researchers to help them get their ideas out of the lab and into use. Now, in a COVID world, our value proposition changes more to emphasise our virtual capability and that we can provide the training and mentoring to researchers and academics in a very engaging way online. While we're a virtual organisation, we've always done everything online, but when we're talking about meetings and workshops and training, that's always been in the face-to-face realm. So that's a change that we've had to make, and it's a change that we're then explaining to universities, research orgs, etc. And currently we haven't seen a drop in our work in the university sector, but we realise that, you know, we're looking at what's coming, and I think it's always useful in any industry that you're in, is you've got where you're currently at and looking at what's happening in the future. And so we're looking at what's happening both in Australia but also internationally, so that we can see changing trends and, you know, what's going on in different sectors as well, and how we might need to change, or that we start anticipating change and we start offering new products and services. Hence, you know, you're seeing this webinar today is addressing COVID issues, which we can see is something that more and more people are going to be wanting to know about, but then also how to plan for as well.
Just before we change slides, I'm just going to remind you, please ask questions if you've got any.
Yes.
We're going to have time at the end for questions.
Yes.
So please type away.
So what we thought we'd do is put a COVID lens on everything. So if we go with the premise that everything in the world is changing, and it's affecting all areas. It's, it's in our water. People who were, before they were testing wastewater and sewage as part of their research, they're now testing wastewater for COVID. We have mental health professionals who are now having to look at the effects on, teenagers, especially teenagers that have a teenager, parents with homeschooling. You've got mental health, aging, keeping our aged isolated. You're having a variety of issues coming out from mental health that are because of COVID. And so, technology has changed, our online education has changed. Automation is moving us, we're moving faster with automation because we want to have contactless. So that's really going to be driving change. We're going to have more virtual reality in terms of training because we don't want to put people close together to train. So, everything that we're doing is changing. And so for your research, you need to be looking as well outside of what you're currently doing and look at how is COVID changing that, or looking at changing that. And so we started to put some of these into this pie chart, and we could have made it a lot busier, but we just thought we'd break out a few areas just to show how some things are changing, and for you to, I guess, keep your eyes open for the bigger picture, the bigger change, but then also the bigger opportunities. Jules, do you want to look at, we've broken down vaccine and what the opportunities have been increasing in that area.
I shall unmute myself. Yeah, I guess we just need to think, Australia has a very rich history in vaccine discovery and development. But now with the COVID lens, this has all been ramped right up. It's never been more pressing, the need to get a vaccine out in such a short time frame. So if you think about the time it takes from discovery to when the vaccine's actually out in patients, all of those different steps are now being accelerated. Safety steps, logistics, production, manufacturing, all of these steps now in the new COVID environment are happening at breakneck speed. So this is just one example of putting a COVID lens on something that has already been happening and successful, but is now having to change in the new COVID environment.
And so if we look at some of the other areas in manufacturing, we've now seen that the supply chain issues that we're having in a variety of products, and whether it's medicines, whether it's packaging, plastics, all sorts of things that we're used to relying on overseas countries to supply. As soon as we start shutting borders and shutting businesses and things, that we need to be thinking about manufacturing in a different way. And so there's lots more thought going into how can we reshore more of our manufacturing for many supply chains so that we have sovereign capability. And that includes in the critical minerals space, it includes in various pharmaceuticals, chemicals, energy. We're then looking at, say, transport. What modifications are going to be needed in transport? This morning it was a case of don't get on the trains. So, well, how are we going to do that long term if we're opening up the country again eventually? So, we're going to be building more trackers, we're going to be tracking people, we're going to be tracking viruses, we're going to be changing the way people are being transported and moved, we're going to change what workplaces look like, we're going to change the way that food production is done and where it's sent to, we're looking at changing energy. So all of the things that we know of day to day are going to change in some way, and it's a matter of really you guys thinking strategically and broadly about how your research can be used in perhaps other sectors or in your own sector, but in different ways. Look at alternatives, look at applicability, look at your skill set, look at the facilities that you have, and how you can do things.
So Nat, can you give us some examples of some case studies of those that have been thinking strategically during COVID?
Sure. So, when COVID happened, we started looking at our customers and what their businesses looked like and what they relied on and how they were, going to operate going forward with all of the different changes and shutdowns, etc. So one of these businesses is actually a 3D scanning, 3D printing company, which was responsible for putting this Game of Thrones dragon out at the Opera House a while back in partnership with another construction firm. And they also do, the Vivid installations. Now, Vivid got cancelled. A whole heap of work just got lost. There were movies that were supposed to be being run out of Fox Studios, and all of these things were cancelled. And so all of a sudden, you've got a business that suddenly got a lot less work than it had before. And so this business we actually took to government and we took to ResMed, as well as to some other organisations with, hey, we're very good at high quality 3D scanning and printing, and we can actually fill some of the supply chain gaps in things where we're talking about parts for ventilators, which are crucial to helping survive COVID. So you've got, working in different areas because you've got fantastic capabilities. So it's really, thinking a bit differently and moving. And so we've helped that particular organisation pick up some more work in a different area. One of the other customers that we work with are a plastics container manufacturer for the food industry. So if you think of, punnets, biscuit containers, your Tim Tams, everything that relies on having a piece of plastic in the packaging, they actually have very good connections into Asia, where they can actually pick up the chemicals and materials that they need to actually then start manufacturing personal protective equipment, where you're relying on that supply of plastics components. They can retool their machines and actually set up to do that, but they actually needed the materials, and that's because of their supply chains that they've already got in place. Jules, you had another example as well.
Yeah, so we've been doing some work with a group that helps support volunteers in the community supporting vulnerable children. And since COVID's hit, they're now working with some partners and some existing partners and new partners around developing an online version of this volunteering capability, and also looking at how this can be expanded beyond children to the elderly and the disabled and those that have been particularly socially isolated during COVID. And this has sort of only happened in a matter of days. They were able to pivot and see, right, this got this great existing product. Who else would benefit from this at this time? And they're having some great success. So it's just thinking laterally.
And we've also been going through the websites of a variety of universities. If you look at the media pages of universities, you can see examples of researcher after researcher that has adapted what they're doing to help in a COVID situation. So we've got a massive list of that we're happy to share with you about how it's changed from their current research and what they're doing in a COVID way.
So Nat, we've got a question. I'm going to pose it to you. Question from Josh. In terms of leading strategic thinking with groups of researchers, what are the key parameters or questions you might suggest for developing the canvas?
Okay. We actually developed a canvas. There's just such a thing, actually. Quite recently, we've done an industry engagement canvas to help broaden thinking. So it starts with what is the core capabilities that you have, what are the current scenarios that you're using them in, the type of applications or the type of sectors, and then you start branching out from that in terms of what other applications and sectors would that then be applicable to. So we do actually have a canvas that we could share, and we can talk more offline about that, but also just using the sectors that we started with and scenario planning it out So we've shown it in the last slide that we had. But yeah, sitting down and going through strategically what's happening in the industry by industry.
But we can touch base with this. We'll put our contact details at the end, Josh, and send us an email. We've got another question from an anonymous attendee. Beyond supporting COVID-based work, are you seeing activity around other interests such as oncology, immune, other infectious diseases? And how much non-COVID work has been reduced? My gut feeling is it's a bit too early to say. What have you seen, Nat, from the data that we've been pulling?
It's more in the focus of everything. So whenever government puts out its funding, it always has its strategic areas of interest. And from what's happening, more focus, I guess, is on fixing things with COVID. So if it has any relation to COVID whatsoever, it's going to have, I guess, a better time at the moment. It's not to say that, you know, there are programs and things in place with funding. Yeah, give it another 6 months and see. But I know from talking to people in the manufacturing industry with funding and that sort of thing, where they have programs that are there at the moment, those funding, that funding will then be re-looked at later on to see whether or not it will be continued. So I'm sure all of these things will be re-looked at and nothing will be guaranteed, as, you know, what was in place will not necessarily always be guaranteed down the track.
Yeah, I think I think in short, it's probably too early to say. And we don't know how funding's going to change, whether it's going to be that the overall pocket of funding will increase and that the increase in COVID research will cause that pot to increase, or whether it's other things have to decrease so that that COVID focus can increase. I think it's still too much in the crisis stage at this point. But very good question.
Do we have any more questions?
I think that's it, unless anyone else wants to ask a question. We are going to put our details here. So if there's no more live questions, we're going to put our details here. And we'll leave this up for a while before we close the session. We will follow you all up with an email early next week with some of the details of, some of the networking events and things that we've seen. There was a question about LinkedIn. We'll see if we can find some good resources about leveraging LinkedIn networks. Josh will follow you up with the canvas. But yeah, please reach out to us. We're happy to help connect, share in any way that we can. And we want to say thank you for joining us.
Thanks.